let me ask you a favor before we start getting into this video. Just please watch it till the end and then let me know what you think in the comment section. I really want your opinions on this, and I want you to listen. And unless you listen all the way to the end, you're not really going to know what the point of the video is. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today is increasingly when I do the videos on a Sunday, what we tend to do on the live stream right after the game is we have it out about the match, and we will talk about positives to start with, and then generally we'll move on to some complaints, which, there's been a pretty consistent theme on what some of those complaints have been this year. And then we end with a bit of draft talk. And then I go back to the comments, a couple of days later. And look, there's a lot of people who enjoy the videos and will let me know about that. And I really appreciate that feedback. A lot of people are very supportive of the channel. But then I also see a lot of people saying you're just constantly negative. And I don't really understand where that comes from. Because if there's one thing I think that we try to do on the channel is be really balanced. Now, I am not going to come on and just forget any negatives if the Seahawks manage to kick a field goal in the last minute and win a game by 3 points against the Washington Commanders. That's just not what this channel is about. There will be channels that will offer that service if that's what you're after. That's not what I'm going to be about. And I don't really think it's right for people to sort of suggest that we should be, just because if you want that, I don't have to provide that. And increasingly people are sort of saying in the comment section that there's almost this like toxic positivity around Seahawks fans, whereby if you are anything other than relentlessly positive, you're essentially negative. That there's only really sort of a black and white way of looking at this. You're either positive or negative with the team. Or, as it's kind of portrayed a little bit, you are, sane or completely unhinged. And with the negative, anything negative being unhinged. I don't really understand where that comes from. So what I wanted to do today is just to tell you exactly what I think, big picture, about where the Seahawks are at, some of my thoughts on the team and on the most important topics that I would call them. And I want you to tell me in the comments section what is unfair about any of these opinions. Okay, so here we go. Here are the sort of the things that I think are the most important. Can Pete Carroll, as the head coach of this football team, win another Super Bowl? My thought on that is yes, that he can. I firmly believe that Pete Carroll can win another Super Bowl in Seattle. If Gary Kubiak can win a Super Bowl, then Pete Carroll can win a Super Bowl. I have absolutely no doubt that that is possible. I do not think in order for the Seahawks to win another championship, they have to remove the head coach. I think that's just nonsense. Pete Carroll is a very good football coach. He is completely proven. He's probably going to be in the Hall of Fame. And I do believe that he can win another Super Bowl. In order to get there, he is going to need, in my opinion, at least one of these two things. He's going to need more blue chip players, and that either means adding blue chippers, either in the draft or in free agency, or he needs some of the younger players who are on the roster currently to turn into blue chip players. That's not easy to do. When you think about the San Francisco 49ers, some of their blue chip players are people like Nick Bosa. When are you ever going to get a chance to draft somebody like that? You're going to have to pick either first or second overall to get that. There's no Nick Bosa type in the draft coming up. For example, they're very rare players. Trent Williams, that was an unbelievable trade, great foresight on the Niners' behalf. But again, how often the legendary left tackles become available for as little as they were available. The Niners capitalized, well done to them. People like Fred Warner, who we liked on the Seahawks Draft Blog, and George Kittle, who we liked on the Seahawks Draft Blog, just saying. To find sort of legit blue chip players who are available later in the draft, it's difficult to do. The Seahawks did it in the 2010, 2011, 2012 draft. The Niners have done it more recently, and kudos to them again. And the McCaffrey trade, again, another brilliant piece of foresight for them. At the time, people wondered, could he stay healthy? Is this really worth it? He's proven to be completely worth it. So you have to doff your cap to the Niners in that regard. It's going to be hard for the Seahawks to sort of find those blue chip players, but if they're going to win another Super Bowl under Carroll, that's probably what they need to do. And that's no fault of Carroll's per se, or even John Schneider's. Every team's looking for legit blue chip players. I think if they're going to win another Super Bowl, those players either have to emerge within this roster or they've got to get some more. And I think that's, stating the obvious. The other thing that needs to happen either instead of this or as well as this, is I do think that they need a top quarterback. The last 10 Super Bowl winners, 9 have been won by what I would call elite slash legendary quarterbacks: Brady, Mahomes, Manning. Even though Manning was a husk when he won it with the Broncos, there has to be something to be said by having someone with his complete career and knowledge to just sort of manage that game against the Panthers in the Super Bowl to win it. Um, these are the players that have won Super Bowls over the last 10 years. Wilson, and then you've got Nick Foles in there as kind of like an outlier. And I don't think trying to mimic the Foles outlier is reasonable. I think you do need a really good quarterback these days to compete. And with the greatest respect to Geno Smith, and I'm going to come on to Geno in a minute, I think in order for Pete Carroll to win a Super Bowl, they are going to have to get a really good quarterback. Either acquiring one through trade, the Rams did that and got Matt Stafford and won a Super Bowl straight away, or by drafting somebody who can be, of the level that at least Russell Wilson was when they won the Super Bowl 10 years ago. So is that an unfair opinion to have? I do think Carroll can win a Super Bowl. I think in order to do that, Seattle either need more blue chip players or they need, a top quarterback. That's the first thing I would say. That's just my opinion on Pete Carroll, and I don't think that's unfair. On to Geno Smith, the quarterback. I think it's obvious, and it's probably obvious to everybody by now. And I think even the people who, a few weeks ago were criticizing people for suggesting that Smith was the quarterback for now and not the future and stuff like that. I think even they have come around to this, to our way of thinking now, that Geno Smith is not a long-term answer. And there's nothing wrong with that. He's a 33-year-old journeyman quarterback who played very, very well at the start of last season. It became a huge story, in particular because of the first game of last season when Geno Smith beat Russell Wilson's Denver Broncos. From there, the momentum grew. He was an MVP candidate. I did a video admitting I was wrong about Geno Smith, a year ago, after his great start to the 2022 season, because I doubted that he was going to be anything other than extremely mediocre, and he wasn't. And he was, for a short period of time, in the MVP conversation and was rightly so in that conversation. Now, since then, since the Germany game, which is a year ago, it's not been as good. Like the second half to last season was hit and miss, perhaps more miss than hit. This season, he's had some really good moments because he's a physically talented quarterback. He's made some excellent throws. He's made some big plays. He's also had too many turnovers. He's had too many turnover-worthy plays whereby he's almost had a turnover and has been quite fortunate, dropped interceptions, stuff like that. We've had a few moments like that. And he has not looked as sharp, as decisive. And when I'm watching him play, I do not feel like I'm watching somebody who can take Seattle to the promised land. Now, I don't want him benched for Drew Lock. I don't think that's reasonable. I think if Drew Lock was better, I think he'd already be starting. I don't think the Seahawks would cut the nose off to spite the face if they thought there was a better quarterback on the roster. I think he's the quarterback for now. I just hope that they are willing to admit that internally, that this is somebody who, he, over the next 2 or 3 years, is not going to give you the best chance to win a Super Bowl. That essentially he gives you the best chance to maybe win against the Rams on Sunday. But from 24-25, when perhaps a window for this team would be seriously opening, I think you're going to need a better quarterback. Now, if they are, and we'll never know, if they internally have already come to that conclusion, then great, there's no issue. I just hope that they have come to that conclusion. And I don't think that's unreasonable. Like I said, I don't want Geno Smith benched. I don't hate Geno Smith. I don't think he's useless. I think this is part of the problem that we get with sort of the toxic positivity side of the Seahawks fan base sometimes, is that you either just completely 100% positive about Geno Smith, or you hate him and you want him benched and you don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand that point of view. I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I think it's acceptable to have the opinion that Geno Smith is a bridge quarterback, and that in order to get to where we all want the Seahawks to get to, contending for a Super Bowl, potentially winning a Super Bowl, they're going to need a better quarterback in the future. Again, I think the two things I've spoken about there are perfectly reasonable. Tell me why they're not reasonable if you want in the comment section. I think you'll have a hard time doing it, but give me your feedback in the comment section. And then the other thing that I think is really important, at least to me, at least in my opinion, and you may well disagree with this, the third thing that I think is sort of like the big opinion that I have on the Seahawks is that I want them to shift money from the safety position into the trenches. I think being on the hook to pay Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs $50 million in cap money next year is preposterous. PFF's not the be-all and end-all, but Jamal Adams is currently ranked as the 28th best safety in football. Quandre Diggs is something like the 65th best quarterback in football, quarterback safety in football. So you're not getting bang for your buck. That's not 50, really, if you're going to spend $50 million on two safeties, they probably need to both be in the top five. And even then, you might not be getting value for money. So I want to see a shift from that idea of having tens of millions invested in the safety position. I want to take that money and put it in the trenches. So, for example, I want to free up that money to keep Leonard Williams. I want to free up that money to maybe go and have the option of competing to go and get a Christian Wilkins as well, if possible, because he's going to reach free agency. The Miami Dolphins are in cap hell. They've got to make a decision on Tua Tagovailoa. If they're going to pay Tua Tagovailoa, it's very difficult for them to keep Christian Wilkins. He might be a free agent. What's going to happen with Chris Jones? There are other players, sort of secondary defensive linemen, Tia Tart, for example, who are going to reach free agency. I'd like the opportunity and the flexibility to maybe go and add some of these players and have a loaded defensive line. For me, there's nothing more exciting other than a great quarterback in the NFL these days than having a loaded defensive line that teams are scared to death of. And I think that's a route to having a really good football team. It's just to be brilliant on the defensive line. And I would like to see the money freed up from Diggs and Adams go into that defensive line. I'd also be very open to the idea of investing in your offensive line. Look, I hope that I think Charles Cross has been okay so far, but you've made an investment out of tackle. I really hope that Abe Lucas can come back and play right tackle and sort of cement that spot again. Now that he's coming off injured reserve. Damian Lewis is out of contract. Phil Haynes is out of contract. You've drafted Anthony Bradford. You've got a stopgap centre. You've drafted another centre who can't beat out the stopgap centre. If there is a really good veteran guard or centre that you want to go and sign in the off-season, I'd like to have the financial flexibility to go and do that. So I want to transfer money from the safety position and put it into the trenches. And I don't think that's an unfair opinion to have. And I think the Eagles are a good example. They have continued to win successfully with a loaded defensive line, very good offensive line. They basically tossed off the safety position this year, and they've traded for somebody on the deadline, cheap trade, bring a veteran in, upgrade that position. But up until the point when they made the trade, they were just kind of rolling with it at safety. And look, the Seahawks are also on the hook for Julian Love's salary next year as well. That's beyond the $50 million that they're on the books for Adams and Diggs. I do not think it's unreasonable for the Seahawks to take that money and put it in the trenches instead. So really, they're my three big opinions. I get the sense that sort of having those opinions for some reason is an issue for some people, that ultimately, unless you are saying Pete Carroll is the bestest ever, or that Gino, lay off Gino, Gino's fantastic, or stop criticizing how much money is at the safety position, that you're in some ways, quote unquote, a hater. I don't feel that way at all. Now, look, there are definitely things like on the Pete Carroll thing. We have talked about Pete Carroll's future for a long time. I do believe Pete Carroll can win a Super Bowl. I think he has to have the environment that he had in 2013, which was a fantastic team, both sides of the ball, legit blue chip players, and he can be the master motivator. He can be the head honcho. He can be that figurehead for a team that can have a lot of success. I've got no doubt about that. But you've got to get those players in. You've got to develop those players. At the moment, I don't think they've got them. So I think until they get those players, one of which is a quarterback, reworking that investment from safety to the trenches, I don't think they will get there again. So that's what I want to see in order to get there, because that has to be the ultimate aim. The ultimate aim, from my perspective as a fan and as a blogger for the Seahawks, is I want to see the Seahawks win a Super Bowl. I don't I don't want to just see them be like at the moment, they're on a trajectory to, I would suggest it's fair to suggest that the Seahawks are going to win 9, 10, or 11 games this year. And maybe they'll be bang in the middle and win 10. And they'll make the playoffs. But I don't expect them to go on the road and beat the Eagles, the Niners, possibly not the Cowboys. Detroit, they seem to have Detroit's number, so I could possibly fancy them. I don't know how they get on against the Vikings. So that, basically the point is that they're good enough to get to a certain point, but then the season ends, and that's kind of what they've been for a number of years now. Not winning the NFC West, getting to the playoffs, kind of making up the numbers in the playoffs, bowing out. They've been good enough to be a good team, not bad enough to be awful or bad, not great enough to be a serious contender. And I want to see them get back to that point. So when I talk about things like shifting money around to improve different areas, that's all it's about. It's about getting better, because that's what I think the Seahawks need to become the best, and I want them to be the best. When I talk about improving quarterback, it's because I want them to be the best. It's not because I've got an agenda. It's because I want to see the Seahawks lift another Lombardi trophy. That's all the motivation is. And I do think Pete can win. Now, listen, I think there are issues with Pete has made mistakes, and that's why we've talked about it. I don't think that, for example, if his appointments of offensive and defensive coordinators over the years have been conducive with getting the most out of the talent that he has on the roster. So I don't think the Seahawks, for example, have appointed a really good coordinator since Dan Quinn left. Now, Dan Quinn has gone on and proven himself to be a very effective defensive coordinator and head coach. It has benefited him when, perhaps not head coach, defensive coordinator, he had the LOB and now he's got Micah Parsons. So that is the caveat there. And when Kyle Shanahan left the Falcons, it kind of went a bit south. But I think most people who follow the NFL would consider that Dan Quinn is a good coach. His defensive coordinator, Chris Richard, didn't work out. Ken Norton didn't work out. Clint Hurt is extremely hit and miss and has not been able to get a consistently performing, productive defense. They've kind of beaten up bad opponents this year and then have struggled in other occasions. They are streaky in the way that the offense is streaky as well. And then when the offensive coordinators, Darrell Bevel was unspectacular, Schottenheimer unspectacular, and I don't think Shane Waldron has proven himself. He's not going to be. I don't think he's going to be interviewed for any head coaching roles at the end of the season. So it is what it is. Now, would I like Pete Carroll to go and get an all-star coaching staff, take a bit of a backward step in terms of controlling everything, be more of the Saban type character as we see at Alabama, and let a couple of superstar coordinators, like look at the job Eric Bieniemy's doing for the Commanders. Pete Carroll, I don't think would ever take a back step and say, there you go, Eric Bieniemy, there's the keys to the offense, in the way that Washington has. I think that'd be better for the Seahawks to do that. Likewise for the defense, to have somebody sort of a Vic Fangio was never going to come to Seattle. But I think that's, having that kind of an appointment would be useful for Seattle. Someone who's been there in the coalface for a number of years has had proven quality. I'd like to see him do that. He's never going to do that. But I don't think that is necessarily restrictive towards Seattle winning a Super Bowl, because in 2013, Darrell Bevel was unspectacular. Dan Quinn had the LOB. The reason the Seahawks were successful is because of Marshawn and Russell Wilson and Doug Baldwin et al. On offense, and the LOB and the defensive linemen they had on defense. In order to get back to being the best, it's about talent. It's about getting those blue chip players, about continuing to grow this roster, and it's about making those personnel improvements to get to where you need to go. And after 2 great drafts, if they can have a 3rd great draft, they could well be there. But I do think that it means finding blue chip players, potentially signing blue chip players, which is why I want them to free up cap space to go and make some potential moves in the offseason. Lest we forget that 2013 season was also the year that they added Bennett and Averill, and they were opportunistic, cheaper moves. But you want the opportunity to be opportunistic in free agency and go and make some signings, rather than feeling like you can't do anything because you've spent all your money on 2 safeties who, to be fair, they're not terrible players. I'm not suggesting they are. They're just not providing value for money. So if you can get value for money elsewhere, that's better. If you can improve your defensive line and maybe just have younger players or different players at safety, I think that's fine. That's what this is all about for me. It's all about sort of driving towards that goal of being in position to win a Super Bowl. So you've heard my take. The toxic positivity movement, as people refer to it, may well take issue with this. And if you have, fine. Tell me why any of those opinions are overly negative, overly pessimistic, unfair, unbalanced. You tell me. I've just told you, I've laid it out. They're my opinions. They're on the big topics with the Seahawks right now. They're my big opinions. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's a perfectly balanced, acceptable view. If you disagree, tell me in the comment section why. I'll respond and we can have a conversation about it. I just hope that sort of moving forward, there's this just a greater appreciation. It'd be very easy for me to come out and do videos after games or in the week and just say everything's great. You know, the top billing guy does that. We don't go there again. We've been through that. And there are other people who do that. And it works for them because, you know, this fan base more than others love to hear how validating opinions on their team. They love the reassurance of actually this is really good. And other fan bases are not as bothered about that. The Seahawks fans are. If I did positive videos all the time, I would get many more hits. I'd get much more positive reaction. I wouldn't get half as much crap as I get online. I would, you know, my most watched videos in the last few years are the two videos I did saying the Seahawks smashed it out of the park and got an A+ draft in 2022 and 2023. You know, if I did videos like that all the time, things are great. Life would be so much easier. I don't want to pull the wool over anybody's eyes or lie to you or be dishonest about my opinions for the sake of clicks and views and super chats and whatever. I'm just going to tell you what I think. I've told you what I think. You give me your reaction in the comment section. Let me know. SeahawksDraftBlog.com for more analysis. Please make sure you like the video as well, because that really helps. Subscribe so you don't miss out any videos. Until next time, bye for now.